Under the scorching Arizona sun, two obese black sisters stood on the auction block as the jeering crowd treated them like cattle, when suddenly a giant cowboy stepped forward and declared, "I'll give you a home." The townspeople watched with cruel amusement, convinced these women were worthless burdens destined for backbreaking labor and mockery. They whispered bets about how long the sisters would last before breaking under the harsh desert life. But the towering mountain man saw something different in their eyes, not desperation, but quiet intelligence and unshaken dignity. His struggling ranch held secrets that could transform all their lives, yet success demanded partners he could trust with both his land and his future. Hidden forces in town had spent years coveting what he possessed, and this unlikely alliance would either secure their dreams or destroy everything they dared to build. Would their partnership bloom into prosperity, or crumble under the weight of a hostile world determined to see them fail? The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trading post as Etta Mae Whitley shifted her weight from one aching foot to the other. Her younger sister Millie stood beside her, both women's faces glistening with sweat under the harsh afternoon light. The crowd that had gathered around them buzzed with cruel anticipation. 3 weeks had passed since their employer, Mrs. Henderson, had died suddenly in her sleep. The elderly widow had brought the sisters west from Alabama, promising them wages and freedom in the territories. Instead, her death left them stranded with mounting debts and nowhere to turn. Sadie Blake circled them like a hawk eyeing prey. The trading post owner's sharp features twisted into a satisfied smirk as she addressed the growing crowd. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "These two owe $47 in transport costs, lodging and meals," Sadie announced. "Payment in full or they work it off. Simple as that." Murmurs rippled through the assembled townspeople. Some shook their heads with mock sympathy. Others whispered cruel jokes about the sisters' size and prospects. A few placed casual bets on how long two large women would last doing manual labor in the desert heat. Etta Mae's jaw tightened. She had endured worse humiliations during her years in bondage, but freedom was supposed to be different. Her quick mind calculated their impossible situation. $47 might as well have been 400. No respectable employer would hire them. No family would take them in. "Who'll take responsibility for their debts?" Sadie called out. The crowd fell silent. Several men stepped forward to examine the sisters like livestock at market. They poked and prodded, commenting on their strength and stamina. Millie flinched but held her ground. Etta Mae stared straight ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Old Pete Morrison, who owned the grain mill, squinted at them through tobacco-stained teeth. His reputation for working hired hands to exhaustion was well known. He opened his mouth to make an offer when heavy footsteps approached from the edge of the crowd. The gathering parted as a massive figure emerged from the shadows. Gideon Cole stood nearly 7 feet tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the sun. His weathered face bore the marks of years spent outdoors, but his pale blue eyes held an unexpected gentleness. The crowd stepped back instinctively. Gideon's gaze swept over the sisters, then fixed on Sadie Blake. When he spoke, his deep voice carried across the silent trading post. "I'll give you a home." The words hit Etta Mae like a physical blow. Not "I'll take them" or "I'll work them." A home. She searched his face for signs of mockery but found none. Millie's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Sadie's eyes narrowed. She had been trying to buy Gideon's ranch for 2 years, claiming his land was worthless scrub. His sudden appearance complicated her plans. "You sure about this, Cole? These aren't house pets. They need feeding and looking after." Gideon reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch. He counted out $47 in silver coins, each one ringing against Sadie's palm. The transaction felt different from a sale. "More like a rescue. Papers?" he asked. Sadie reluctantly handed over the debt documents. Gideon glanced at them briefly, then tucked them away. He turned to face the sisters directly. "I have a ranch 20 miles north. Hard work but fair treatment. Your choice." Edemy studied his weathered features. Something in his manner suggested this wasn't charity. He needed something from them as much as they needed escape from this humiliation. Her mind raced through possibilities. Why would a solitary rancher suddenly want company? What did he see in them that others missed? What kind of work? She asked. The kind that matters. His cryptic answer should have worried her. Instead, it sparked her curiosity. During her years as a house slave, she had learned to read people's intentions through subtle signs. Gideon Cole carried himself like a man with secrets, but not dangerous ones. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed by the anticlimactic resolution. Sadie Blake lingered, her calculating gaze shifting between Gideon and the sisters. Her forced smile failed to hide her displeasure. "Pleasant journey," she said through gritted teeth. Gideon led them toward a sturdy wagon hitched to two strong horses. As they climbed aboard, Edemy caught whispered conversations from the remaining townspeople. Some questioned Gideon's judgment. Others speculated about his motives. All agreed the arrangement was doomed to failure. The wagon lurched into motion, carrying them away from the trading post toward an uncertain future. Edemy glanced back once at the dusty settlement, then fixed her attention on the trail ahead. Whatever awaited them at Gideon's ranch had to be better than the humiliation they were leaving behind. If you are enjoying this story of how an unexpected partnership will change 3 lives forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distance, background, and heart. Because what happens in the next part at Broken Creek Ranch will completely change everything they thought they knew about their future. The wagon wheels crunched over gravel and hardpan as they rolled through the desert landscape. Edemy studied their rescuer from the corner of her eye. Gideon's massive hands held the reins with surprising gentleness, guiding the horses around rocks and ruts with practiced ease. "How long have you owned the ranch?" she asked. "5 years. Inherited it from my uncle." His clipped answers revealed little, but Edemy persisted. Years of managing household accounts had taught her the importance of understanding any situation fully. "What kind of livestock do you run?" "Cattle mostly, some horses." "How many head?" Gideon glanced at her with renewed interest. 43 cattle, dozen horses. You know ranching." "I know numbers. And I know when someone's being careful with their words." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Behind them, Millie listened quietly while observing the changing terrain. The flat desert was giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and pine. "Water rights secure," Edemy continued. This time Gideon turned to look at her directly. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who just got rescued." "I ask questions because I just got rescued. What do you really need from us?" The wagon crested a hill, and Broken Creek Ranch spread out below them. The main house sat weathered but solid, surrounded by a barn, corral, and scattered outbuildings. Everything looked functional but neglected, like a place where one man did his best against overwhelming odds. As they descended toward the buildings, one of Gideon's horses began acting up. The animal had been skittish since leaving town, tossing its head and fighting the bit. Now it started to rear, threatening to bolt. Millie stood up in the moving wagon without warning. Before either of her companions could react, she began making soft, clicking sounds with her tongue. The horse's ears swiveled toward her voice. She continued the gentle rhythm, weaving in low, humming notes that seemed to flow from some deep place of understanding. The horse calmed immediately. Its muscles relaxed, and it fell into step with its partner as if nothing had happened. Gideon stared at Millie with amazement. "Where did you learn that?" "Plantation had 40 horses. Master's son was afraid of them, so I handled the training." "All of them?" "All of them." Gideon pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. The sisters climbed down, stretching muscles cramped from the long ride. Up close, the ranch showed signs of one man struggling to maintain too much property alone. "Come inside," Gideon said. "We need to talk properly." The house's interior surprised them. Clean and organized, with handmade furniture that spoke of careful craftsmanship. Books lined one wall, though dust on their spines suggested they went unread. A large desk dominated one corner, covered with papers that appeared to frustrate their owner. Gideon gestured toward the desk with visible embarrassment. "That's part of my problem. I can read some, but writing's hard. Numbers worse." Edemy approached the scattered documents. Bills of sale, tax notices, correspondence from buyers, all in various states of confusion. Her trained eye quickly identified the chaos of someone overwhelmed by paperwork. "You're losing money," she said bluntly, "every month. Because you can't track properly what you're spending versus earning. Because I'm stupid with books. No, because you never had to learn. That's different." She picked up a bill of sale from 6 months ago. The prices seemed low for cattle in decent condition. Another document showed feed costs that appeared inflated. A pattern emerged of someone being taken advantage of by people who assumed he couldn't verify their numbers. "How much are you paying for feed?" she asked. Gideon named a figure that made her wince. She had managed household budgets large enough to recognize when someone was being cheated systematically. "That's robbery. You're paying city prices for bulk goods." "Maybe, but I need the feed." "You need better negotiating and records that prove what you're owed." Millie had wandered to the window overlooking the main corral. Several horses grazed in the afternoon sun, but their behavior caught her attention. They moved restlessly, ears constantly swiveling toward the hills beyond the ranch buildings. "Something's got them nervous," she said. Gideon joined her at the window. "They've been like that for weeks. Can't figure out what's spooking them." Millie studied the animals with the intensity of someone reading a familiar language. "Not predators. They'd be bunched together. This looks like they're listening for something." "Listening for what?" "Don't know yet. Need to spend time with them." Gideon looked between the two sisters, seeing them clearly for the first time. Not burdens to be fed and housed, but people with skills he desperately needed. The realization seemed to shift something fundamental in his thinking. "I brought you here because I needed help," he admitted. "But I was thinking about strong backs and extra hands. I didn't expect. People who could think," Edemy finished. "People who could see what I've been missing." He walked to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of whiskey, then seemed to reconsider and put it back. Instead, he pulled out a metal box and set it on the desk. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a detailed map of his property. "There's something else. Something I haven't told anyone in town." He spread the map across the cleared desk surface. His finger traced a path from the main buildings toward a narrow canyon marked in pencil. "Hidden Valley, about a mile from here. Found it by accident chasing strays 2 years ago." The sisters leaned closer as he described what lay beyond the canyon's narrow entrance. A sheltered basin with year-round water, grass that stayed green through summer, and something else that made his voice drop to almost a whisper. "Hot springs, natural ones coming up from deep underground." Edemy's breath caught. Hot springs meant mineral content. Mineral content meant potential healing properties. Healing properties meant people would pay serious money to experience them. "How hot?" she asked. "Perfect temperature. Like a bath drawn just right." "Anyone else know?" "Just us now." The magnitude of what he was revealing hit both sisters simultaneously. This wasn't about cattle or horses or even the struggling ranch. This was about a potential fortune hidden in the hills, and a man who needed partners he could trust to help him unlock it. If you are enjoying this story of how hidden treasures will transform their partnership forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distance, background, and heart. Because what happens next at the secret hot springs will change everything they thought possible about their future. Dawn broke cold and clear as Gideon led them through the narrow canyon entrance. The path twisted between towering rock walls, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. After 10 minutes of careful navigation, the passage opened into a hidden valley that took their breath away. Steam rose from 3 natural pools carved into the canyon floor. The water glowed pale blue-green in the morning light, fed by springs bubbling up from deep underground. Grass grew thick and green around the pools, nourished by mineral-rich overflow. The entire basin felt like a secret world untouched by the harsh desert beyond. Edamie knelt beside the largest pool and dipped her fingers into the water. The temperature was perfect, hot enough to soothe aching muscles but not so hot as to be uncomfortable. She brought her wet fingers to her nose and detected the faint sulfur scent that often accompanied healing springs. "People will travel hundreds of miles for this," she said quietly. Gideon watched her face carefully. "You think it's worth something. I think it's worth everything." Over the following weeks, they threw themselves into transforming the ranch with newfound purpose. Edamie took over all paperwork and correspondence, her quick mind organizing years of neglected records. She discovered Gideon had been systematically overcharged for supplies while being underpaid for his cattle. Her carefully worded letters to suppliers resulted in reduced costs and better payment terms. Millie worked magic with the livestock. The nervous horses calmed under her patient attention, and she identified the source of their anxiety. A family of mountain lions had been denning in the nearby hills, their scent carrying on the wind. She developed a system of strategic noise and movement that convinced the cats to relocate without confrontation. More importantly, she began planning infrastructure for the springs. Her experience managing plantation grounds translated perfectly to designing paths, changing areas, and overflow channels. She envisioned a retreat where visitors could experience healing while feeling completely secure. Gideon contributed his knowledge of the local terrain and his formidable work ethic. But more than that, he provided something neither sister had experienced since leaving Alabama: genuine partnership. He asked for their opinions on every decision and defended their choices when supply vendors questioned taking orders from women. Their first test client arrived unexpectedly in the third week. Mrs. Eleanor Carmichael, a wealthy widow from Phoenix, had heard rumors about healing springs from a ranch hand who'd worked briefly for Gideon. She arrived in an elegant carriage, skeptical but desperate after months of ineffective treatments for her arthritis. The transformation was remarkable. After 3 days of soaking in the mineral-rich water, Mrs. Carmichael's swollen joints showed visible improvement. Her grateful testimonial letter reached Phoenix society circles within days, sparking immediate interest from other wealthy invalids seeking relief. Word spread faster than they had anticipated. Within a month, a steady stream of visitors began making the journey to Broken Creek Ranch. Edamie handled reservations and payments with businesslike efficiency. Millie managed the practical aspects of hosting guests, from meal preparation to maintaining the springs. Gideon provided security and transportation, his imposing presence reassuring nervous travelers. The success brought unexpected challenges. Sadie Blake began appearing at the ranch with increasing frequency, always with some pretext about business in the area. Her sharp eyes cataloged every improvement, every sign of prosperity. Her questions grew more pointed with each visit. "Lot of fancy carriages coming through lately," she observed during one unannounced stop. "People like the scenery," Gideon replied evenly. "Scenery doesn't usually require 3-day stays." Edamie emerged from the house carrying ledgers, deliberately making her business activities visible. "Some folks appreciate quiet places for rest and reflection." Sadie's gaze sharpened. "Reflection can be expensive. Hope you're keeping proper records for the tax assessor." The threat hung in the air long after Sadie's departure. That evening, the three partners discussed their growing vulnerability around the kitchen table. Success was making them visible, and visibility brought scrutiny they might not survive. "She's fishing," Edamie said. "Trying to figure out exactly what we're doing here." "She's been after my land since I inherited it," Gideon added. "Always claimed it was worthless scrub." "Not anymore," Millie observed. "Now she knows it's generating real money." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the guest quarters. Mrs. Patterson, a society matron from Tucson, had taken a fall on the path to the springs. Millie reached her first, quickly assessing the twisted ankle while keeping the older woman calm. As they helped Mrs. Patterson back to her room, Edamie's mind was already working through implications. Injured guests meant potential lawsuits. Lawsuits meant court proceedings. Court proceedings meant public scrutiny of their business operations and legal status. That night, she sat alone in the ranch office, surrounded by carefully organized ledgers and correspondence. The business was thriving beyond their wildest expectations, but success was attracting exactly the kind of attention they could least afford. Through the window, she could see Gideon checking the livestock one final time before bed. Millie was in the garden, harvesting herbs by lamplight for tomorrow's guest meals. 3 months ago, they had been strangers bound together by desperation. Now they were family, united by shared dreams and complementary strengths. But family meant having something precious to lose, and people with precious things were vulnerable to those who specialized in taking them away. The irony wasn't lost on her that their greatest success might contain the seeds of their destruction. In town, Sadie Blake was undoubtedly planning her next move. The question wasn't whether she would strike, but when and how. Etta Mee began making her own plans, knowing that when the attack came, they would need every advantage their partnership could provide. If you are enjoying this story of how unexpected success brings dangerous new threats, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distance, background, and heart. Because what happens next when their enemies make their move will test everything they've built together. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Broken Creek Ranch as another elegant carriage departed toward Phoenix. Judge Harrison Blackwood and his wife had stayed 5 days, seeking treatment for his recurring back pain. His glowing endorsement would reach the territorial capital within days, bringing even more prestigious clients. Etta Mee counted the week's earnings with quiet satisfaction. $200 in 7 days, more than the ranch had generated in entire months before their transformation. The success should have felt triumphant. Instead, it brought growing unease. The trouble started small. Supplies ordered from town arrived damaged or incomplete. Feed deliveries came late or not at all. Ranch hands seeking temporary work suddenly became unavailable. Each incident could be explained as coincidence, but the pattern was unmistakable. Sadie Blake was tightening her grip on their lifeline to civilization. "We need to diversify our suppliers," Etta Mee told Gideon over breakfast. "Nearest alternatives are 50 miles south, double the transport costs. Better expensive supplies than no supplies." Millie looked up from feeding scraps to the ranch cats. "It's not just supplies. People in town are talking differently, asking questions about what we really do here." The questions were growing bolder and more pointed. Why did wealthy visitors stay so long? What kind of business required such privacy? Why had 3 outsiders suddenly prospered when established ranchers struggled? Etta Mee knew the real question behind all the others. How had 2 former slaves and an uneducated giant created something successful enough to threaten the established order? That afternoon, she rode into town alone to visit the courthouse. The building stood weathered and imposing, its records supposedly chronicling every land transaction in the territory. She had been researching property laws for weeks, understanding instinctively that knowledge would be their ultimate protection. The clerk, a nervous man named Pemberton, initially welcomed her inquiries. Legal research was routine, and Etta Mee's precise questions and careful note-taking marked her as someone who understood proper procedures. But as her research deepened, his comfort level decreased. "Lot of interest in land records lately," he observed during her 3rd visit. "Property law is fascinating. Mrs. Blake was asking about some of the same documents last week." Etta Mee's pen stopped moving. "Which documents?" "Territorial boundary surveys from before statehood, old Spanish land grants, inheritance disputes." The information chilled her. Sadie was researching the legal foundation of Gideon's ownership, looking for cracks in the title that could be exploited. The strategy was methodical and dangerous. That evening, Etta Mee spread maps and documents across the kitchen table while her partners watched. Property boundaries drawn by different authorities over decades created a maze of overlapping claims and conflicting jurisdictions. Spanish colonial grants conflicted with Mexican territorial awards, which conflicted with American territorial surveys. Your uncle's inheritance came through American territorial courts, she explained to Gideon. That's legal, right? If the Americans had clear title to grant, if the previous Mexican government had clear title before them, if the Spanish colonial authorities had clear title before that. Gideon's face darkened. You're saying my land might not be mine. I'm saying someone determined enough could probably find grounds to challenge it. Whether they'd win depends on having better lawyers and more money. The implications settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Their success had painted a target on their backs, and their enemies had both resources and motivation to destroy what they'd built. 2 days later, the first direct assault came. A territorial marshal arrived with papers questioning their business licensing and tax obligations. The visit was ostensibly routine, but his timing and thoroughness suggested coaching by someone familiar with their operations. Edami handled the inspection with careful professionalism. Every document was properly filed, every tax obligation current, every business practice legal and transparent. The marshal found no violations but left with detailed notes about their client base and income levels. They're building a case, she told her partners after he departed. For what? Millie asked. Don't know yet, but they're documenting everything we do, looking for something to use against us. The harassment escalated systematically. Health inspectors arrived unannounced to examine their water sources. Fire marshals questioned the safety of their guest accommodations. Even the territorial veterinarian appeared to inspect their livestock for disease. Each inspection found no violations but created anxiety among their guests. Wealthy visitors didn't appreciate being questioned by officials or having their treatments interrupted by bureaucratic procedures. Several canceled reservations, citing concerns about the ranch's legal standing. The financial impact was immediate and painful. October revenues dropped by 40%. November looked worse, with only half their usual bookings. The success they'd fought so hard to build was crumbling under systematic pressure from enemies they couldn't confront directly. During this siege, Edami made a discovery that changed everything. Deep in the courthouse records, she found inconsistencies in land transfers that had nothing to do with Gideon's property. Pattern recognition skills honed by years of managing complex accounts revealed something far more sinister than simple harassment. Sadie Blake had been manipulating property records for years. The evidence was subtle but unmistakable once she knew what to look for. Boundary surveys that shifted mysteriously between filings, inheritance documents with altered dates, tax liens that appeared and disappeared without proper legal proceedings, an entire network of fraudulent transactions designed to transfer property from vulnerable owners to Sadie's control. Gideon's ranch wasn't Sadie's first target. It was simply her most ambitious one yet. The realization brought both terror and opportunity. They weren't just defending their own success anymore. They were the only ones positioned to expose a conspiracy that had been robbing people throughout the territory for years. If you are enjoying this story of how corruption threatens everything they've built, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distance, background, and heart. Because what happens next when they uncover the full truth will determine whether justice or greed wins the day. The November wind carried the first hint of winter as Edami spread her research across the kitchen table. 3 months of careful investigation had revealed the scope of Sadie Blake's corruption. Property transfers that defied logic, boundary changes that benefited only one party, and inheritance disputes resolved with suspicious speed. The Martinez family lost their ranch 2 years ago, she told her partners. Tax lien appeared overnight, sale completed before they could appeal. Gideon studied the documents with growing anger. I remember that. Miguel Martinez swore he'd paid his taxes. He had. The lien was fraudulent, but by the time anyone could prove it, Sadie owned the property. Millie traced property boundaries on the territorial map with her finger. How many families? At least 7 that I can document. Probably more. The pattern was methodical and ruthless. Sadie targeted properties with valuable resources or strategic locations, then manufactured legal problems their owners couldn't afford to fight. Widows were especially vulnerable, lacking the connections and resources to challenge complex legal maneuvers. She's been building an empire, Edami continued. Water rights, mineral claims, grazing lands. All acquired through fraudulent documents that look legitimate unless you know exactly what to examine. The evidence was damning but dangerous. Exposing Sadie's crimes would require testimony from victims who had already lost everything and officials who might be complicit. The territorial legal system that should provide protection was the same system Sadie had been manipulating for years. That afternoon brought the confrontation they'd been dreading. Sadie arrived with 2 well-dressed men who introduced themselves as territorial land assessors. Their purpose became clear immediately. Boundary dispute has been filed regarding your eastern property line, the senior assessor announced. Survey needs to be conducted to resolve conflicting claims. Gideon's jaw tightened. What conflicting claims? Spanish colonial grant takes precedence over territorial awards. Your eastern boundary encroaches on previously granted land. Edami stepped forward, her research paying immediate dividends. Which Spanish grant specifically? The assessor consulted his papers with less confidence. Grant issued to the Herrera family in 1798. The Herrera grant covered land 40 miles south of here. I have the original survey records. Sadie's smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in her eyes. Records can be misleading. Boundaries were often poorly marked in colonial times. Not these boundaries. They reference specific landmarks that still exist today. The verbal sparring continued for an hour, with Edami systematically dismantling every legal argument the assessors presented. Her detailed knowledge of property law and territorial history frustrated their attempts to intimidate through official authority. We'll need to conduct a formal survey, the senior assessor finally declared. Process will take several weeks. After they departed, the implications became clear. The survey was designed to create uncertainty that would drive away remaining clients and drain their resources through legal fees. Even if they ultimately prevailed, the process could destroy their business. They're not trying to steal the land anymore, Edami realized. They're trying to make it worthless to us. That evening, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of preparing to defend against Sadie's latest attack, she would expose the entire conspiracy through the one forum where truth still mattered more than influence. The territorial court in Phoenix scheduled regular sessions to hear property disputes and criminal cases. Judge Morrison, recently appointed from back east, had a reputation for fairness and immunity to local political pressure. If she could present her evidence there, Sadie's corruption would face scrutiny from someone with no stake in maintaining the status quo. Preparing the case required contacting victims scattered across the territory. Edami wrote carefully worded letters to families who had lost their property, explaining what she discovered and inviting them to seek justice. The responses came slowly, many writers expressing fear of retribution even after losing everything. Miguel Martinez was the first to agree to testify. His family had been forced to work as hired hands on their former ranch, watching strangers profit from generations of their labor. His quiet dignity and detailed knowledge of fraudulent tax procedures would provide powerful testimony. Others followed. The widow Patterson, whose late husband's mining claim had been seized through fabricated debt proceedings. The Thompson brothers, whose inheritance had been challenged by mysteriously discovered prior liens. Each story followed the same pattern of legal manipulation designed to transfer property to Sadie's control. Millie contributed crucial support by maintaining ranch operations, while Edami focused on legal preparation. Her steady management of their remaining guests and careful attention to their reputation kept the business functioning despite mounting pressure. Gideon provided moral support and protection, his imposing presence deterring the increasingly aggressive harassment they faced. His transformation from isolated rancher to confident partner anchored their small family during the most dangerous period of their fight. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Pemberton, the nervous courthouse clerk, appeared at their ranch one evening after dark. His hands shook as he handed Etta Mee a bundle of documents. "I made copies before she could destroy them," he whispered. "Original boundary surveys, real tax records, authentic inheritance documents, everything that proves the frauds." The papers contained smoking gun evidence of Sadie's systematic document tampering, original surveys that showed true property boundaries, authentic tax records that proved liens were fabricated, and genuine inheritance documents that revealed how she'd stolen from grieving families. "Why are you helping us?" Etta Mee asked. "Because she killed my brother." The statement hung heavy in the night air. Pemberton's brother had discovered the document tampering 2 years earlier. His sudden death in a riding accident had never been properly investigated, but Pemberton suspected murder disguised as misfortune. "I can't prove she killed him, but I can prove she's a thief." With authentic documents as evidence and multiple victims willing to testify, they finally had everything needed to bring Sadie Blake to justice. The territorial court date was set for December 15th. Until then, they had to survive whatever desperate measures their enemy might attempt to silence them permanently. If you are enjoying this story of how the evidence builds toward a final confrontation between truth and corruption, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distance, background, and heart. Because what happens next in the territorial courthouse will determine whether justice finally prevails over years of systematic theft and fraud. The territorial courthouse in Phoenix buzzed with unusual activity on the morning of December 15th. Word had spread about the land fraud case, drawing spectators from across the territory. Ranchers, businessmen, and territorial officials filled every available seat, all curious about allegations that could shake the foundation of local property ownership. Judge Morrison took his seat with ceremonial gravity. His reputation for fairness had preceded his appointment, and his Eastern education made him immune to the local political pressures that had corrupted previous proceedings. Sadie Blake sat confidently at the defendant's table, flanked by two expensive lawyers brought in from Tucson. Etta Mee rose to present the prosecution's case with documents organized in precise chronological order. Her months of research had created an unshakable foundation of evidence that told a story of systematic theft spanning nearly a decade. The evidence will show a pattern of fraudulent document creation designed to transfer property from legitimate owners to the defendant through illegal means, she began. Her presentation was methodical and devastating. Original boundary surveys proved that property lines had been altered in official records. Authentic tax records showed that liens were fabricated after the fact. Genuine inheritance documents revealed how Sadie had stolen from families during their most vulnerable moments. Miguel Martinez testified first, his weathered hands steady as he held the original deed to his family ranch. His voice carried quiet dignity as he described discovering that tax liens had appeared overnight in amounts he had never owed for property he had never failed to maintain. "I paid every tax assessment for 23 years, he stated simply. "Never missed a payment, never received a delinquent notice. Then one day they told me I owed money that didn't exist." The widow Patterson followed with equally compelling testimony about her late husband's mining claim. She produced correspondence proving her husband had maintained all legal requirements, contradicting official records that showed abandonment and forfeiture. Each witness added another piece to the puzzle of systematic fraud. The Thompson brothers described inheritance challenges based on liens that had been backdated to appear legitimate. The Rodriguez family testified about boundary disputes manufactured from altered colonial grants. Pemberton's documentary evidence provided the smoking gun. Original records he had preserved before they could be destroyed proved that official courthouse documents had been systematically altered. Dates changed, amounts modified, signatures forged with professional skill. Sadie's defense team attempted to discredit the witnesses by questioning their memory and motivation. They suggested that complex property laws had simply been misunderstood by unsophisticated landowners who lacked proper legal representation. The strategy backfired spectacularly when Etta Me systematically dismantled each legal argument with her encyclopedic knowledge of territorial property law. Her cross-examination of Sadie's lawyers revealed that they themselves couldn't explain the inconsistencies in their client's documentation. If Mrs. Blake's transactions were legitimate, Etta Me asked, why do the original boundary surveys contradict current official records? The lead defense attorney shuffled through papers without finding an adequate response. Survey methods were less precise in earlier times. These surveys were conducted with identical equipment by the same territorial surveyor. The only difference is the dates when they were filed and the property boundaries they describe. Judge Morrison leaned forward with obvious interest. Are you suggesting official records have been altered after initial filing? I'm stating it as established fact, Your Honor. The evidence proves systematic document tampering over a period of years. The courtroom stirred as spectators realized the full implications. If official records couldn't be trusted, dozens of property transactions throughout the territory might be invalid. The economic chaos could affect everyone present. Sadie Blake finally took the stand in her own defense. Her composure cracked under Etta Me's relentless questioning about specific dates, amounts, and procedures. Contradictions multiplied as she struggled to explain discrepancies in documents she claimed to have filed legitimately. How did you obtain survey information for the Martinez property before conducting an actual survey? Etta Me asked. I relied on existing records, records that didn't exist until after you filed your claim. I may have been mistaken about the timeline. Were you also mistaken about the tax amounts, the boundary markers, and the inheritance liens? Sadie's expensive lawyers objected repeatedly, but damage was accumulating with every answer. Their client's credibility was disintegrating under the weight of documented evidence and logical inconsistency. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess to review the mountain of evidence presented. When court reconvened, his expression left no doubt about his conclusions. This court finds overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud perpetrated through the manipulation of official property records, he announced. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, document tampering, and theft of property through illegal means. The sentence was swift and comprehensive. Sadie Blake would face 5 years in territorial prison, pay full restitution to all victims, and forfeit all property obtained through fraudulent means. More importantly, Judge Morrison ordered a complete review of all property transactions in the territory over the previous decade. The courtroom erupted as the implications sank in. Families who had lost everything would regain their property. Legitimate landowners could rest secure in their ownership. The reign of corruption that had infected territorial property law was finally broken. Outside the courthouse, Miguel Martinez approached Etta Me with tears in his eyes. His family would return to their ranch within the month. The widow Patterson could reclaim her late husband's mining claim. Justice had been served through truth and evidence rather than violence or political influence. 1 year later, Broken Creek Healing Springs thrived as a symbol of transformation and renewal. Wealthy visitors from across the territory sought treatment in the mineral-rich pools, but the clientele now included working families who had saved for months to afford the healing experience. Etta Me had become the territory's most respected expert on property law, consulted by officials and citizens alike. Her reputation for fairness and encyclopedic knowledge made her an unofficial arbiter of disputed claims throughout the region. Millie managed the expanded retreat operations with quiet efficiency, her understanding of land and animals creating an oasis of healing that attracted people from hundreds of miles away. Her therapeutic gardens provided herbs and vegetables that enhanced the healing experience for every visitor. Gideon stood as the cornerstone of their thriving community, his transformation from isolated giant to respected leader complete. The three partners had created something unprecedented in the harsh territory, a place where dignity, justice, and healing flourished regardless of background or circumstance. Their success had proven that partnership based on mutual respect could overcome any obstacle. That truth was more powerful than corruption, and that justice achieved through intelligence and perseverance created lasting change that benefited entire communities. If you enjoyed this story of how dignity and truth conquered corruption and prejudice, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring tales of justice, transformation, and the power of unexpected partnerships to change the world.